I'm Molly Gibson, Associate Assistant Professor of English, member of OCTC Women in Support of Education, or WISE. Thank you for coming. Welcome. October has been designated Domestic Violence Awareness Month since 1981. This is an initiative conceived by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. The purpose was to connect advocates across the nation who are working to end violence against women and their children, and later all victims, regardless of sex. Awareness activities focus on mourning those who have died as a result of domestic violence, celebrating those who have survived, and connecting those who work to end violence. This is the fourth consecutive year the Davis County Attorney's Office Domestic Violence Task Force has worked with WISE and other campus organizations to help our OCTC community increase awareness of domestic violence issues. And thank you, Barb Titmore, Director of Counseling Services, for co-sponsoring this event. And to everyone on the task force, we very much appreciate you being here. Please silence your phones if you haven't. Make sure you've signed in before you leave if you didn't get a chance to. Help yourself to pizza and drinks, and if you need to leave early, please just go quietly out the back. And now our Davis County Attorney, Mr. Claude Porter.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Barbara, and to OCTC for allowing us to do this for the fourth year. Let me introduce some of the members of the task force who are here this morning. I guess it's still morning, isn't it? Ken Castledon with White House Counseling Services, Molly, of course, Vicki Glass with OASIS, Katina Hayden with the Department of Community-Based Services, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, Laurel McElhern is with the Davis County Public Schools, Bob Porter is the Assistant County Attorney in our office, who is the domestic violence prosecutor. Susan Silva is with the Children's Advocacy Center in Henderson. Kyle Smith is our victims advocate, and also part of our drug court program, which is another part of this. Kathy Thomas Pickrell is the Targeted Assessment program with the University of Kentucky. And Carla Ward is with New Beginnings Sexual Assault Services. Again, thank you for having us. I'm going to do, this is something new. This does not technically exist right now. It begins January 1st, 2016. Kentucky has adopted a new program for domestic violence that will address dating violence and violence from sexual assault or stalking. The new forms are called interpersonal protective orders. And I'm going to give you just a very brief overview, and then we're going to get into the program, the kinds of things that we do. A person who has a dating relationship right now is not able to get a domestic violence order. If you're only dating someone, and that may apply to many of you, you don't qualify. We have those, and I think we probably had them in this week, come in and ask for something like that. People have had a relationship. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is what is a relationship. The statute is not very helpful, but we've given some things that we're sort of looking for. It will apply to individuals who've had or in the past had a romantic or an intimate relationship that's not casual and not just a business relationship or a school relationship. We can look at certain kinds of things to determine whether you had a romantic relationship. You have telephone calls back and forth. Have you sent cards and letters on birthdays or other important events? Do you send emails? We get a lot of emails and social media stuff about what people send to each other. Those are things that we can use to look at and determine if people have a dating relationship. We'll also look at whether there's an expected affection between the parties. They have something that they've been doing. They came together here and they sit together. They come to other social events. They may go to other kinds of school events or other kinds of places together. Those things added up. They take each other to dinner, movies, other kinds of events together. Again, we'll look at calls, letters, emails, social media. Again, going with each other. How often and what kind of interaction do they have? How long has it been going on, the relationship? This is not a sixth grade, this week I'm seeing Susie, next week I have Sally. This is not what we're looking for here. We're looking for some kind of relationship that appears to have been ongoing for a while and continuous, and we'll look for the last time they had some sort of interaction that appeared to be a dating relationship. We can look at what the statute says or anything else, other factors that would imply a substantial connection. And what I just told you is exactly what we know and what we're looking for now, and we don't know exactly what that is, but we will define it as it goes on. And then what we have to look for, and the law says, is a reasonable person would understand that you had a dating relationship. We will probably err on the side of caution and let the court decide whether they actually had a dating relationship when it comes up. The person who's eligible as a member of that dating relationship and the other person who's involved in it commits dating violence, which is defined as a physical injury, a serious physical injury. The other three on there, or the other two, stalking and assault, are separate and you can get an interpersonal protective order for those for up to 10 years if you're the victim of an assault, sexual assault, or a stalking. Also, it's the infliction of the immediate fear of physical injury, serious physical injury, stalking. Okay? And stalking, just so what you know, stalking is a crime now. Regardless of whether you can get an interpersonal protective order, it's a person who engages in a course of conduct, and the statute says it has to be at least 2 occurrences, who intentionally and directed at a specific person, not necessarily on social media, but directed at a specific person. So I have to tell Kyle what I'm looking for, or that I'm telling her something. If she wants to get an interpersonal protective order against me. And it has to seriously alarm, annoy, intimidate, or harass. It has to serve no other legitimate purpose. So if you have a child together, which will put you into domestic violence, not an interpersonal, but if your children are not your children, they're yours, but not the couple's, it's possible that communication could be related to the child. Which would serve a legitimate purpose and may get you out of stalking, but that's a whole different matter. That's just things we have to look for. But it would cause, again, that reasonable person rears its ugly head and cause them substantial mental distress or stress. Okay? The person who has the feeling that the dating partner is intimidating and harassing, annoying, alarming them without a legitimate purpose can ask for the interpersonal protective order in the county where they live, or if they've gone to another county because they're trying to avoid that person, they can file it there. If there's a minor, and that's one of the things that will happen if the person is less than 18, a parent or guardian will have to file, and if they're still in school, a minor is in school, the court may impose conditions to try to provide protection with minimal disruption to the educational process. Again, that will take some fleshing out. Again, they're not available till January the 1st of 2016. You'll file them in the same place, the same way. They'll be available 24 hours a day. That domestic violence orders and emergency protective orders are available. Emergency orders will be issued, and they may be continued like domestic violence orders or emergency protective orders for up to 6 months, and they can be good for up to 3 years. And they are renewable. Okay. Now we'll get into the program. And our first presenter is Ken Castleton, who's going to under control. Okay, just a couple of things before I get started. I'm going to give one disclaimer now. I'll give another one later on in the program. You know, domestic violence is really that taboo kind of topic. It's one that we hear and see on TV. It's one that we hear about in the media, especially when famous persons get busted for this kind of thing. But actually sitting down in communities, talking about it, it's not one that we ordinarily just bring up. It's almost like, you know, no one wants to say the suicide word, no one wants to talk about domestic violence, so that's why we're here, to bring awareness to it. Just out of curiosity, how many here are students? Okay. How many here are here for the pizza? I'm just kidding. So, here's the thing. Regardless of why you're here, okay, you're going to be exposed to different topics related to domestic violence. We don't anticipate that anything will be offensive, but it is intense. This is an intense thing. So just keep that in mind. Some of the things that we talk about, they're the things that no one wants to talk about. That's why we're doing it. That's why we have awareness groups like this. So just a little bit about that. The topic that I have right now is about power and control. Power and control is different from general violence within a relationship. So family violence obviously is some kind of violent action between family members, whether it's brother and sister, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, parent. So go over to the relationship status within the family household. But it really encompasses all types of violence. So regardless of whether or not it's sibling or elderly, child maltreatment, domestic violence itself is more of a specialized area within that family violence, if that makes any sense. Domestic violence and dating violence all represent a pattern of control, a pattern of coercive, controlling behaviors that an individual places on another individual. Predominantly it's male against female, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. That's just statistically, obviously, the direction that it heads. Domestic and dating violence are not just a physical and sexual assault, and that's one of the myths or misconceptions that we want to explain today. There's some statistics here, and I saw some others. Did that get passed out, that thing about the statistics?
It's on the table in the back if anybody wants the packet that we have. We didn't tell you that, but you can pick it up on the way out.
So there's some materials in the back as far as things that we're going to be discussing, some slides and whatnot that you're going to have up here. As far as the statistics go, you can Google domestic violence, you're going to get a whole plethora of things. The ones that I have here, I'm not going to lie, they're a little outdated from like 2006, 2008. I think the ones up there are more up to date. However, I will say that whatever numbers I have here, they've just increased since then. Domestic violence is on the rise. It's a known fact. Roughly 25% of women have been exposed to violence in an intimate partner relationship in one form or another. Another statistic that I bring to mind is that 62% of 11 to 14-year-olds, middle school age, that roughly, over half, in other words, of teenagers, early teenagers, are already exhibiting patterns of domestic violence through verbal abuse. So this is one of those areas of preventative measures we really need to reach out to our young people. Why do men use violence in intimate partner relationships? Well, some ideas that people have are that it establishes control. They're acting out of culturally designated roles. This is, in other words, what I call the just cause theory. We do things just because that's the way we were brought up, just because that's the way things are, just because, and we really don't have a reason for why we do the things we do. It's just because that's the way that it is. We might mirror things that we pick up on. Values and actions are both
taught and they're also caught. I don't know if you've ever been exposed to that kind of lingo before, but basically there are things that I'm going to teach you as an adult if I'm your parent, but then there are also things that you're going to learn from me that I don't have to say anything about, that you're just going to pick up on, and one of those things is domestic violence. Another reason is because we can get away with it, and that it's a learned behavior. Another piece to that also is because it works. Unfortunately, it is a means to get something out of it, and it can oftentimes domestic violence works in that relationship. Not every act of violence between two intimate partners is domestic violence, but again, like I said, it's a piece of that overall family violence that encompasses more of a pattern of control, pattern of coercion over another individual. So I put together this iceberg. Everyone knows about an iceberg that roughly you see 20% on the outside above the surface and 80% of the iceberg is down below. The same thing goes with domestic violence. We often attribute domestic violence to be physical or sexual. For instance, a man walks in on Monday morning and to work and he's got a black eye. What's the first thing you think? Got in a fight. Over the weekend, right? A woman walks in with a black eye on Monday morning. What's the first thing you think? She got into, he beat her, whatever. Got into a fight at home. We attribute the physical characteristic of fighting to domestic violence. But if you see up here, as best you can possibly see, I suppose, with it being, me not being able to stand it, I'm sorry, for getting this thing, that much of what encompasses domestic violence isn't necessarily against the law. For instance, male privilege. Anybody know what male privilege is? Male privilege is basically the idea that man holds certain responsibilities or ideas or behaviors or whatever just because he's a man. Like, for instance, the old adage that men are the decision makers in the household and it's his way or the highway. Or the idea that he is going to be the one that brings home the money and she stays at home. Things like that, this idea of male privilege, that it's one way for one gender, it's another way for another gender. It's not necessarily against the law to live your life that way and run your household, but it's a pattern of coercion and control over the individual. Intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation. Isolation in the sense that these patterns of control keep the other individual, the female for instance, in the example I'm going to use, from being able to have a social life, from being able to interact with family members, from being able to live the life that she wants to outside of the control of the relationship. Substance abuse, using children against the other individual. So if you leave me, I'll kill the children, or if you do that, then I'll tell all the kids all that stuff that you don't want them to know. I mean, just using something against them in the fashion of using the children as their mode or the modality to do so, to exhibit that control of coercion. Verbal abuse, pestering, nagging. These aren't necessarily things, guys, that you can call the police on the phone and say, arrest him, he's pestering me. There's not a whole lot there, but you have to come through the gamut of fear of the individual, control from the individual, in the sense that that person is exhibiting a pattern of control or coercion over the victim's life. Power and control wheel, basically this is, you can Google this, power and control wheel, you can see this all over the internet. This is basically what I've just explained to you, but it gives a list of more details. And I'm going to actually have a stack of these in the back as well in terms of the power and control. It's in the hand. Oh, wonderful. Excellent. Sorry, I didn't know that was in your hands. So you have that as well. These are basically the same types of categories that I've just outlined on the iceberg that allow an individual to have power and control over someone else in a relationship. Just some things to remember. Domestic violence is hard for anyone to manage. Hard for anyone, when we say manage, meaning hard for anyone to really identify and accept and acknowledge that it's happening. It's even harder to see. I shouldn't say it's, I shouldn't put that qualifier on there. It's hard to see whether it's your friend, your family. It's necessary to have support so that the individual doesn't feel alone and that the help is here. So I'll end with, I mentioned the disclaimer that this is something that sometimes may trigger different emotions or thoughts because this is something most people don't want to talk about. How many people do we have here that are professionals that actually work with victims in domestic violence? Raise your hand. Okay, so we have quite a few people here, just so you know. I'm going to be paying attention in the back, or if they're in the front, to anyone if you happen to leave. If you need to give me a head nod, we'll get somebody to respond in any way that we need to. At this time, I believe Kathy, right? You're coming to discuss the cycle of violence.
Hi, I'm Kathy Thomas-Pickrell, as was already noted, and I work for the University of Kentucky through a program called the Targeted Assessment Program. Can you hear me? Is this working? Okay. And part of my job is to assess victims of domestic violence and then link them with services in the community, often OASIS, or to provide education and counseling for them. So I'm here today to talk briefly about the cycle of violence, which, is this in their handout too? Okay, this is in your handout. And the cycle of violence is a theory that tries to explain the patterns of behavior in a domestic violence relationship. And what we know about a theory is it tries to explain something. So I'm going to go through this and know that I'm teaching you this. It's black and white, but there's all variations of gray and different things that can happen within this cycle. So we'll start with the tension building phase. And the tension building phase is just that. When we talk about domestic violence, especially I've noticed through the course of this presentation, we'll say he, and we'll talk about the perpetrator. And when we say she, we're talking about the victim. Domestic violence is heterosexual and homosexual. It can happen in both relationships. And statistics show us that the majority of perpetrators are male. The majority are victims of female. That does not mean all men are perpetrators, okay? We're just talking about in the scope of domestic violence. So we have a lot of men in the audience. Please don't be offended. This is just what statistics show us, okay? So the tension building phase is just that. Tension is building, something is wrong. He might be perturbed about something, frustrated about something. It might be relevant. It might be a relevant concern. It could be something irrelevant. It could have nothing to do with her, or it could have everything to do with her. There's no set amount of time that the tension building phase lasts. It can be minutes, it can be hours, it can be days. And for the victim, usually the theory goes, she understands that he is upset about something and she tries to help him cope, not do anything to set him off, keep everything calm. And the term on the paper is walking on eggshells. If you can think of how hard it would be to walk on eggshells and not break them, that's the term we use to explain tension building phase. As the theory goes, at some point, he's going to be upset, there's going to be a straw that breaks the camel's back, and he will explode. And the explosion takes us into the violence phase, okay? Violence can be verbal, physical, psychological, sexual. And again, there is not a specific amount of time that this phase will, this process in the phase will happen. It can be minutes, it could be hours, it could be days. And the violence stops when the perpetrator chooses to stop it, or when maybe the victim can get away from the situation, or if there's intervention, like maybe the law is called or something like that. Once the violence has de-escalated, we move into the honeymoon phase. Sometimes you'll hear that called hearts and flowers. And this is where the perpetrator feels remorse for the behavior and the actions. And there were probably going to be apologies and promises. There could be gifts. There could be, I'm going to take you out to eat, or I'm going to do this for you, or I'm going to do that for you. The big thing here is there's apologies and promises to change behavior. And often there's the perpetrator will take responsibility, but they'll victim blame. And what I mean by that is, I'm so sorry I gave you a black eye. I should not have done that. But when you do that, it makes me so angry, I just can't control myself. And with domestic violence, you'll hear that said a lot. He just can't control himself, or the perpetrator, she, whoever. They control themselves in other situations with other people. They don't go off on their boss at work, or the cashier at Walmart, or the person who's providing day care for their child, or in other social situations, they don't lose control. They only lose control and choose to lose control with their intimate partner. And as Ken was saying, this is a way to maintain power and control, and it's a scare tactic. So once we move out of the honeymoon phase, it's never on the cycle of violence, but between honeymoon and tension, you should put routine. And what happens in routine phase is we go back to our normal daily functioning. Whatever's normal for us, you do your thing, I do my thing, we do our relationship thing, and everything is usually calm and normal. And maybe some of the changes that were promised in the honeymoon phase are being carried out right now. And the routine phase gives victims hope that, oh, maybe this time is going to be different. He said he wasn't going to do this, or she said she wasn't going to do this, and she hasn't done it, or he hasn't done it. And, you know, he seemed really remorseful this time, and it got really bad, and maybe he realizes the horribleness of his ways. So maybe this time it's going to be different. And there's no set amount of time for the routine phase either. What we know about domestic violence is if someone has been abusive once, they are highly likely to be abusive again. It's not usually just a one-time incident. And I'm not going to throw out numbers because I don't think my statistics are dead on. So, but it's a high number. If somebody's going to be abusive once, it's going to happen again. And what we also know about a cycle is it repeats itself. These behaviors don't normally change without both parties seeking assistance or help or counseling or intervention. What we know about the cycle also is over time, it takes less to set the perpetrator off. So the tension building phase becomes smaller. It takes less of a severe incident. And the abuse progressively gets worse. More lethal tactics are used over time. And the honeymoon phase diminishes also. So there's less remorse, less guilt, less shame. It just becomes the norm for our relationship. One thing I want to bring up, because I feel it's important, I've taught this to victims or survivors several times, and I've had the question, well, don't all couples fight? And when even healthy couples fight, you know, there's tension prior, and then there's an argument, which they associate with the violence phase, and then there's apologies. Yes, that's very, very true. However, the severity of what happens in a cycle where there's two healthy partners is very, very different than this. Tension building phase would be, hey, what's wrong? I can tell something's bothering you. Violence would be maybe a verbal disagreement, but there's not name calling, there's not character attacks, there's no physical or sexual violence. It's two people having maybe a heated argument. And honeymoon would be, I apologize, I'm going to take responsibility for my portion of this, and you take responsibility for your portion, and we're going to move on. So I bring that up because I think that's a valid point. As I said, this is a theory. A couple of things that are problematic with this theory is it does not explain why domestic violence happens. It just tells you what's going to, the pattern of behavior. And also, not all victims associate with this pattern of violence. Some survivors will say, there is no tension building phase. I have no idea when he's going to go off on me. Or there is no honeymoon phase. Or we stay in the tension building phase. There's no honeymoon, there's no routine. So again, just keep in mind that this is a textbook, and there's all variations of what can happen, okay? I think I'm going to turn it over now to Ken, and he's going to set us up for a video.
Be afraid, no, I
My name is Vicki, and I'm an advocate for domestic abuse at Oasis Incorporated. We serve the 7 counties in the Brad area, and we have someone in our office 24/7 that you can call. There's cards on the table in the back, and I'll be here if you need to talk to me afterwards, if anybody wants to have a conversation or to talk about anything. So my part of this is to explain why people stay in abusive relationships. You just saw what could have been a healthy way to deal with some things that happen in a home in an unhealthy way. We don't always wake up in a relationship knowing that it's unhealthy and there's domestic abuse. We start out in a relationship with love and hope and all the things that are on this paper that you have and that's on the screen behind you. We start out with those things, and we have love and we have hope in a relationship. And you know, one morning you might wake up and you have an abusive incident in the cycle of violence, and that's not going to be a good enough reason to just leave a relationship when you have children. And you know, most of us are not going to do that because we have this hope and this love in that relationship, and you know, we built a home together and a family. So it's hard for us to understand, some of us that haven't been in abusive relationships, to get why people stay in abusive relationships. It's not as easy to leave as we might think it would be. Other reasons that we stay is that we make light of the abuse. If we grew up in homes that were abusive and that were dysfunctional, we may not see the abuse as a problem because we're desensitized to it and we make light of it. We'll make comments, and I've heard lots of comments like, you know, it wasn't as bad as what my mom had to deal with, or my sister, or my aunt, so, you know, it's okay. No abuse is okay, though. We've really got to get that point out, that there's no amount of abuse that's okay. We may blame ourselves when we're in an abusive relationship. You know, after a while, like Kathy was talking about with the cycle of violence, we get blamed in the abuse. If you hadn't have done this, I wouldn't have had to hit you. So eventually, you know, you take on that role that, you know, if I could just make the spaghetti better, or if I didn't have this complaining all the time about something, then this wouldn't happen. So we blame ourselves. We have a link between love and violence that comes from, again, from maybe growing up in an abusive environment. What happens is there's the hopelessness that comes in when you are in an abusive relationship. A lot of individuals have a hard time even getting up in the morning to do the things they need to do, and they're struggling to make a home, to take care of their children, so they don't have the energy to leave an abusive relationship. And they're told that nobody's going to want them and nobody's going to have them anyway, so they believe that after a while. And that's another reason that people stay in abusive relationships. We can go through here. We've got gender roles that make a difference. We've talked about already embarrassment and shame. You don't want to go tell anyone that you're in an abusive relationship because it's something that, you know, we don't expect to find ourselves in. And it's hard to break out of that when we have that guilt and shame in a relationship. We don't want anyone to know. Not shining a light on the abuse is the worst thing we could do. That keeps it in the dark, and that's denial. Denial is abuse's only friend. It's denial. Okay, it continues. There's financial dependency, lack of support in a relationship. Fear. A lot of people do not leave because their partners told them, if you leave and you take my kids, I'm killing you. Or if you leave, I'm taking the kids and you'll never see them again. That's a pretty good motivator to not leave. And that nobody's going to believe you anyway. And that happens a lot as well. Not wanting to be alone is a big deal for a lot of people. You know, there's that abandonment issue. They don't want to leave. They don't want to be alone. Loyalty, which is misplaced. A lot of times we misplace our loyalty. We have a rescue complex. Women in general are nurturers by nature, And we think that if we could just love that person more and do things a little better, then that will make a difference, and we continue to try to fix the relationship. That's another reason women do not leave abusive relationships. Guilt. Don't want to leave because of the children. The guilt of what's going on with the children is a big reason to not leave or to leave. Sometimes the guilt and the children down the road in an abusive relationship can help you leave an abusive home or environment, but not always. Dependency on drugs and alcohol. We have a lot of clients that, to deal with the substance abuse, to deal with the domestic violence, they turn to the substance abuse, and that makes it very hard to leave. And there's all kinds of other reasons. You could add your own, and we know there are more. This is not inclusive, there's more. Again, if you need to talk to me later, I'll be here afterwards. And I am going to introduce Susan Silva. She is the Children's Advocacy in Henderson, Kentucky. And she's going to read a poem.
Thank you. The Children's Advocacy Center is located in Henderson, but we do serve the 7-county area of the Grad District. So I'm privileged to read this poem today. It's called I Got Flowers Today, and it's dedicated to battered women. I got flowers today. It wasn't my birthday or any other special day. We had our first argument last night, and he said a lot of cruel things that really hurt. I know that he's sorry and didn't mean to say the things he said, because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today. It wasn't our anniversary or any other special day. Last night he threw me into a wall and started to choke me. It seemed like a nightmare. I couldn't believe that it was real. I woke up this morning sore and bruised all over. I know he must be sorry because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today. It wasn't our anniversary or any other special day. Last night he threw me into a wall and started choking me. It seemed unreal, a nightmare, but you wake up from nightmares. And I woke up this morning sore and bruised all over. But I know he is sorry because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today, and it wasn't Valentine's Day or any other special day. Last night he beat me and threatened to kill me. Makeup and long sleeves didn't hide the cuts and bruises this time. I couldn't go to work today because I didn't want anyone to know. But I know he's sorry because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today, and it wasn't Mother's Day or any other special day. Last night he beat me again, and it was worse than all the other times. If I leave him, what will I do? How will I take care of the kids? What about money? I'm afraid of him, but I'm too scared and dependent to leave him. But he must be sorry because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today. Today was a special day. It was the day of my funeral. Last night he killed me. If only I would have gathered the courage and strength to leave him. I could have received help from the women's shelter, but I didn't ask for their help. So I got flowers today, for the last time.
I'm Katina Hayden with Community-Based Services. I'm a supervisor over a child protection unit. Just this morning before I came, I had a victim in my office discussing her situation. Her worker was not available, so I was speaking with her, and it just so happened to be about domestic violence. Our allegations originally had to do with something as basic as neglect, and the woman disclosed many other things that were going on in her home. One thing that we've noticed with children that are witnesses to domestic violence, they're more apt to be sexually abused, physically abused, and neglected. Rarely do I assign an investigation that does not involve one of these other things. Number one predictor of abuse is woman abuse. We can pretty much predict if a child witnesses their mother being abused, that they're going to be abused. Doesn't mean that's necessarily by their father. Most likely it's by a paramour or someone that mom is dating, or it could be anyone actually, mother or father, that their these other significant other. The more severe abuse of the mother, the worse the child abuse. Typically, if we see a mother going to the hospital numerous times, then we find out that there is physical abuse or neglect of the child. Actually, on Sunday, we received a phone call regarding a mother being physically abused. The child was the one in the hospital. It involved state lines, so we had people going across state lines. We had to work with Indiana because the abuse happened in Indiana, but the child was being treated in Kentucky. We were trying to correlate services between Indiana and multiple counties in Kentucky for this child and this mother. Turns out there were more children, there was more abuse, more neglect, and the perpetrators was numerous paramours and fathers of these children. In families where the mother is assaulted by the father, daughters are at risk of sexual abuse 6.51 times greater than girls in non-abusive families. Every time that we go out on sexual abuse that is done by a father, we find out there's domestic violence with the mother. I can't think of a single time. I'm sure there is, but I just don't know of one. And we gather approximately anywhere between 40 to 50 reports a week of some type of abuse or neglect, and most often domestic violence is involved with this. That is just here in Davis County. That doesn't count statewide, outside counties, the Green River region. We have a lot of county crossovers. Other counties will investigate things that happen in Davis County. Older children are typically hurt whenever they try to intervene. They're trying to protect mom. It might be the 3-year-old trying to get daddy off of her, or the paramour off of him. It may be the boyfriend. It may be the husband trying to keep her from that. And like we said earlier, it's not just man on woman or woman on man. It could be man on man, woman on woman. Either way, there's children involved. They intervene. They get hurt. Male children who witness the abuse of mothers by fathers are more likely to become men who batter in adulthood than those male children from homes free of violence. I'm a little bit off here. Family violence experience of children: danger, chaos, fear and tension, confusion, isolation, and hopelessness. So this child that is exposed to domestic violence wakes up and hears the domestic violence. They're the kids that are hiding in the corner. They're the kids that go to school, fall asleep on their desk. They're the discipline problems in school. The school tries to get the information from the kids to try to help them. Most likely not always successful, because these kids cannot really tell what has happened at home. They're scared of talking, so the cycle continues. These children end up growing up and becoming adults that abuse one another or are being abused. How do you report? Here's the number: 877-597-2331. You have to report. We're not going to be able to help the kids that are abused or neglected if you're not reporting the domestic violence. If you are in the apartment and next door you hear somebody hitting each other, beating one another, you need to report this. I had a situation when I was in college, which has been forever ago, that I actually heard the people below us fighting. Unaware, I was unaware, completely unaware that they were fighting. They were hitting, the woman was hitting the ceiling with a broom trying to get help. She was locked in a bathroom trying to get assistance. When she finally was able to get out, he actually beat her until she was life flighted to Chandler Medical Center at UK. She lost her child when the child went to foster care. Child then was placed with her mother. I ran into this woman long after that, and she told me what happened. I had no idea. The ambulance was there. Somebody could have been sick. She told me everything that happened. This child, I have since run into her at a college function, and this child has had to go to see her father on visits, and the violence continues. Dad is now on his 5th wife, and this child has been abused. This child has watched other children be abused. This child is now an adult and talks about how her younger siblings have been abused numerous times. And I'm thinking, if I had realized that and I had made that one phone call to the police, I might have helped her not be in the hospital, helped that child not be separated from a family member. So this is something you have to take responsibility for also in the community. We don't disclose who called. We don't tell it on that. That is mandated. You can be anonymous if you don't even want us to know your name, but you need to report. The information you need is just the basic information: name, address, phone number. I get phone calls all the time. Unknown name, unknown number. We saw them standing in front of Franny's on 25th Street. We have something as simple as that. And if we can get a police officer there, then we can get a social worker there. We can do it. But call the police. They will call a social worker. They have no qualms about calling us and coming out there and assisting, making sure this child is safe. Again, please call. You can also go online and make an online report. And you can actually just Google Cabinet for Health and Family Services for the state of Kentucky, and it'll lead you that way. Thank you all.
We're going to play one last video, and this one is rather intense. We will end with questions, comments.
Another punch flat in your stomach, another push in the back, finding blue on your bed sheets. And I'm calling home when sirens whisper my name. I'm calling home, I'm calling home. I'm calling home, I'm calling home. The strange thing is I still don't recognize this kind of pain, 'cause when our lips meet I wish everything stays the same. But the force of your hands will remain, and you don't only bruise my body, but all of my soul. Another punch flat in the stomach, another push in the back, finding you on your bed sheets. And I'm calling home when sirens whisper my name. I'm calling home. And every time you promise